We're unpacking abstract nouns and putting the participants back into the process of militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism, because you've been taught those abstract terms in order to explain the causes of World War I. But those factors, if they're true, don't just disappear when the war starts. They continue, and we can use them to explain the course of the war, what happened, starting with militarism. When we talk about militarism, we've got to talk about Germany because they simply have the biggest army. And the success of Sander's leadership at Gallipoli is an example of German focus on military strategy. And we can see that an alliance with Germany has really paid off in the short term, at least, for the Ottoman Empire, because militarism has allowed the Germans something to offer in exchange for an alliance with the Ottomans. And we're talking about alliances now, and Britain and France are at Gallipoli in part, at least as a result of their alliance with Russia. But it's really important to note that the German militarism was very effective against an imperial Russia in 1915 in the Battle of Tannenberg. It's led ultimately to the collapse of the Russian Empire and expansion of military government in Germany. Who won the Battle of Tannenberg? Hindenburg and Ludendorff. Google them. What happened to them? But it's important to understand that these two powers, Britain and France, are bitter rivals in the process of empire building. And a lot of that explains the course of the war, particularly in the Middle East. So now we're talking about imperialism, and our best example has to be Britain. They just have the biggest empire, and the use of Australian troops at Gallipoli is a good example of this. It shows Britain was able to mobilise soldiers around the globe and use their control of the seas to deploy them around the globe. So having identified Britain as imperialist, we have to question the motives of the British at Gallipoli. What did Britain plan to do, having successfully taken Constantinople? It's worth remembering that in the end they did, in the way that the French and British empires divided. The collapsed Ottoman Empire explains a lot about conflicts that continue to this day in Iraq, Syria, Israel, Palestine, Greece, Turkey. In terms of the outcome of the war, in the short term, German militarism was highly successful against the declining empires of Russia and even France, and successful in the short term in propping up the declining empires of their allies, Austria-Hungary and the Ottomans. In the long term, however, Britain and British imperialism's ability to amass global resources because of its empire and links to the US, which is really an ex-empire of Britain, like it or not, was just too powerful. Lastly, nationalism. It's tricky to say in some countries what's nationalism and what's imperialism. Were the Anzacs fighting for their new nations or for their old empire? I think we can say that during World War I, empires all over the world were giving way to nationalism, and that's the legacy of World War I in countries such as Australia and modern Turkey. But it's important to understand that all these abstract ideas, militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism, aren't separate things. They all bleed into one. That's unpacking abstract nouns and putting the participants back into the process. Unpacking abstract nouns and putting the participants back into the process.